Hi, my name is Sissy, and I want to welcome you to my show, Getting Healthy with Sis. I am married to my hunky husband, Matt, and together we own a fitness and nutrition coaching studio in Lakeland, Florida called Restoration Fitness and Nutrition. We have 2 little boys, and I've been a nutrition coach for 5 years, helping countless people to revamp their lives and see amazing results implementing one healthy habit at a time. My passion is to help women just like me realize they don't have to be a victim to poor eating habits and poor health. Instead, through proper education and empowerment, they can take control of their health and live the healthiest and happiest life possible. As you tune into my show, I promise you're going to learn new things about your health. You're going to be inspired to take action towards your goals, and you're going to have a ton of fun along the way. Welcome back. Welcome back to our podcast, Getting Healthy with Sis, and we're going to continue the story of our journey through pregnancy loss. October is Pregnancy Loss Awareness Month, and so we just wanted to take some time to share our story, how that has impacted our personal family. We've got Matt, my husband, here, and again, I said this in our first episode when we were sharing about George, but our heart in sharing this is, number one, to help and bring hope to women who have experienced pregnancy loss in some way, shape, or form. But we are also not naive to the fact that when you walk through pain and suffering, there is a thread that the human heart can identify with, like, no matter what type of suffering it is. You know, like, would you say that? Like, I feel like having gone through what we've gone through, there are times where I am talking with someone or they're going through something really difficult, and I'm like, I'm not going through that, but I know what it feels like to feel deep loss and to feel devastation and torment and deep pain. And this is how God came in that moment for me. And so maybe you're hearing this and you're not dealing with pregnancy loss, but you're dealing with some other type of loss or pain. And so our prayer is that this could help encourage you and bring you hope.
And also for guys.
Yeah, and God, yeah. Like there's a C.S. Lewis book that is called The Problem with Pain. And the problem with pain is that we cannot escape it. It is a condition that every single human has to go through, and it looks different in every life. And I'm going to kind of talk about that in this part of our journey. But if you haven't listened to the episode about us losing George in December of 2020, you want to go back and listen to that. That kind of gives context to this part of the story, because we lost Benjamin after we lost George. And so we'll just kind of fast forward. So after where we left off with George is that once we had kind of walked through the healing process, we knew that, or I knew, like, that was such a fluke. I was totally healthy. Our baby was healthy as far as the doctors knew. That's never going to happen again. If we can just get pregnant again, we'll be good to go. And because it was just so rare losing a baby like that. And so that was kind of part of my mindset. And I was just like, well, getting pregnant is kind of easy for us, so let's just go for it. So it was in the summer of 2021, we decided to try to get pregnant again, and we did. And, I took a pregnancy test at like 4 weeks. It was positive, and then at 5 weeks, I actually started bleeding, and we lost that pregnancy like at 5 weeks. And that's what's known as like a chemical pregnancy. So an egg and a sperm met, but it didn't really get off the ground. It didn't evolve past that. And so it was coming off the tail end of George. That was hard. It was kind of a letdown, but it was not something that was super hard to get through, because it was just it was there and it wasn't. And so anyways, that we moved through that. And then I think maybe a month or 2 later, we were like, okay, let's try again. And so we did, and we got pregnant. And This time we were pregnant with Benjamin. And so the way kind of the story with Benjamin, like I said at the end of the episode about George, our previous episode, I really felt like I had walked through healing and that my heart was in a good place. I felt good mentally. I felt very stable. I didn't feel like my heart was traumatized or heart of stone, like mad or angry. I felt really healthy mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And so that's why Benjamin, my journey with Benjamin really, really threw me for a loop. And really from the very beginning, my journey with Benjamin was very, very difficult. And I found myself from the very beginning, sometimes you're going throughout your day and you don't even realize it and you're like praying. I do that, like where I'm just like, something is on my heart and I'm doing my day, but I don't realize I'm like talking to the Lord about it like all day long, like all day. And then sometimes, I'll stop and I'll really pray, but like there's just this ongoing conversation in my subconscious mind. And that's really what was going on with Benjamin early on. And I found myself going, Lord, could you please show me that I'm going to get to have this baby? Could you please just confirm to my heart that he's going to live? Could you just show me? It was like I was so desperate. I just needed to, it was like I was searching constantly. Could you just give me that little like, hey, everything's going to be okay. You're going to have this baby. I was searching far and wide in my subconscious mind all day long, just constantly behind the scenes. And I remember around 5 or 6 weeks, I was in my car driving and the music kind of turned on in my car. And, I wasn't even listening to it. And it was that song, Good, Good Father. It was like on the radio or something by Chris Tomlin or whatever, which we've all heard that song a million times and we know it. And you're a good, good father. It's who you are. It's who you are. And I'm loved by you. Da, 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 da. Well, when the song broke into the phrase, you are perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways to us. You're a good, good father. It was like suddenly I tuned in to what the song was singing and I heard it. Like I wasn't paying attention before, but when I heard that phrase, it like struck something inside of me and I just began crying in my car. And it was like my heart was saying to the Lord, Lord, you are perfect in all of your ways. And I started saying this and praying this out loud through tears. I said to him, I said, you were perfect when we lost George, and you were perfect when we lost that second baby, and you will be perfect if we lose this baby. You will still be perfect. And then my heart began to say, and I charge you with no wrongdoing, because like how often is it when we go through pain? And even in the book of Job, it talks about Job. It says he went through all that he went through. And in this, he never charged the Lord with wrongdoing. But how easy it is when we go through pain and suffering to be like, it's your fault. You're mean. You're evil. You are a bad God. Like you could have saved me from this, but you didn't. And so I share that to say not like, oh, look at me. No, like that is the grace of God. That was the grace of God over my heart to be able to say like, even if we lose this baby, Benjamin, even if we lose him, you will still be perfect. And so it was just this moment in my car where I was just like, crying. And it was just like, oh, thank you, Lord. And so anyways, that night I remember getting home and after we put Maddie to bed, I was telling Matt about, do you remember me telling you about that? I was telling Matt like this happened and kind of about like what had happened in my car. And so as I was telling Matt about this, I realized that there was this part of me that was wanting the Lord to say, Sissy, everything's going to be okay. So you can just go ahead and put your hope in that everything's going to be okay. That's really what my heart was looking for. I need something sure. Someone just tell me something sure so I know I'm not going to be hurt again. And I was wanting for the Lord to kind of give me that confirmation. It's going to be okay. It's okay to trust and put your hope in the fact that you're going to have this baby. But then I realized, oh my gosh, the Lord never calls us to put our hope in an outcome. He's never like, hey, you can 100%, even when you're married to a wonderful person. I can never put my hope in that Matt is going to be here forever, that he is going to be a certain way forever. Like, I can't do that. And if I go ahead and put all of my eggs in that basket and put my hope on Matt will and can fail me. But if my hope is in the Lord, then he is a sure foundation. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, I've been wanting to put my hope in getting to have this baby. And the Lord's like, sorry, can't. There's no hope in any foundation other than me. And so that was kind of a big thing. And did you have anything about that?
It's good.
So that was like early on with Benjamin. And so I was just like, okay, Lord, thank you. I received that. But I still was like, I feel so, I cannot emphasize enough how hard emotionally that pregnancy was. I was like a crazy person. And I would be like,
yes.
I was just, and after the fact, when I got into counseling, my psychiatrist was like, you were dealing with PTSD. Do you know what PTSD is? And I'm like, I've heard of it. And they're like, all of those signs that's PTSD. And I'm like, oh.
I would say too, like the whole time I was like, she's feeling this way. I'm like trying to like believe the best.
Yes. He'll be
down.
like, honey, you have to
like,
trust God. And I'm like,
no,
I'm trying.
You're not thinking that way. Nope. And like just really trying to like advocate for her, but also like lead her in like, you're pregnant, you're not thinking straight,
trust God. And I'm like, I'm trying. I'm trying. But I just want to say that's where like having a good counselor and mental health people, that like there was something deeper going on with me that was not a matter. I'm like, I do trust God, but something is very awry inside of me. It is very terrified, because here we go. Guess what? I walked through George. Well, I felt fine while I'm not pregnant. Just like the guy that comes off of the battlefield feels fine until he hears a bus backfire that sounded like a bomb that he experienced while he was in the war. And then bam, he's taken back. And that's where the PTSD comes in. So that was the same thing with me. I felt fine being not pregnant. And it was when I got into that situation again that then it was like it was all just, this battle of trying to not panic all the time. And so early on, so that happened with that song. And then early on, I was just like, God, I feel so wishy-washy. I just feel so double-minded. And I need some scripture. I need something to stand on and like put my stake in the ground on. And God is so faithful. And he reminded me from Matthew 6, he spoke this verse to me. And it became a foundation. It did not take away all of the storm around me, but it did become a foundation that I had a choice if I was going to stand on it or not amidst the turmoil I was in. And the verse is this: who of you by worrying can add a single day to his life? And it was like the Lord he just spoke that to my heart. And it was as if he was saying, Sissy, when you are worrying about this baby, you do not have the power to add a single day to his life. You don't have that power. So you need to stop worrying. And so that became like a place I could place my feet and stand. And, that didn't make it like easy to not worry, but it was just this thing of like, hey, if you want to chase down that path of worry and fear and anxiety, like, listen, you literally have no power to make this happen the way that you want or not. No one has that power or control. And, so I was thankful for that, like, nugget that I felt like the Lord showed me. And, we went through the pregnancy. I was feeling all of the nausea. There were times where I remember, I would hear stories of people going through stillbirths or, and that was just like, oh, so triggering for me. Just like, oh my gosh. The whole time it just felt like I was in this thing that was so fragile. At any moment, it could just be tapped and it would crush and crumble. And I remember Matt talking to me one day and was just like, he was like, babe, like, you think that you have like control over outcomes, like, and you don't. Like, he was like, we don't have control over Maddie's life. Like, he could die at any moment. You don't have control over your life. I don't have, like, we're not in control. So there are like a lot of unknowns in this life, and we just have to like trust the Lord. And I'm like, I know I'm trying, it was just so dadgum hard. So that kind of, we're rocking along though. Pregnancy is never easy for me. I have a lot of nausea and it's just not a fun time and blah. It's not fun at the beginning. But I remember kind of going back through my memories of this time. I remember there was a time I was 13 weeks pregnant with Benjamin. And I remember, you might remember this too, but I remember waking up, it was a Sunday morning, and something was just off with me. I was off. I was very worried, very anxious about the baby. I was like, he's died. I know it, and I think too, because I knew once you get past the 13-week mark, or maybe it's 12, there's a threshold that you get past, and maybe this was even in hindsight what triggered this, but once you get past this 12, 13-week threshold, you can no longer miscarry the baby at home. Like, it becomes a hospital experience where you have to go in and give birth. And I've never connected that dot, but I think that might have been part of why that was such a triggering, because I was just like, oh my gosh, now I'm like in the real scary part. Like, I've passed through, like, I'm like extra vulnerable. And so I remember I sent Matt and Maddie to church, and I was just like, y'all go ahead. Like, I got to get a grip on myself here. I'm like super upset. I stayed at home and I cried and I cried and I cried. And I was so scared and so worried. And I remember thinking like, Lord, I can't lose another baby. Like, being pregnant is so hard. It's hard on my family. It's hard on me, like being nauseous. My family has to sacrifice a lot. Like, I can't keep, and this was my mindset. So odd. I can't keep going through this pregnancy thing and carrying these babies and losing them. But I'm like, why was I even thinking about that? Like, why? I think it was like the PTSD, but because there was nothing apparently wrong with me. But I just had this trembling fear on the inside of me. So I pulled myself together eventually, and I wanted to go to church because I was like, I know that's probably the right place for me to be. I need to be around some people that can help. Like, you're going to be okay, encourage me. And so I finally went, and I remember talking to one of our pastor's wives after the service, and I was just telling her, like, could you please pray for me? I just feel so, Anyway, so I kind of got that out, felt a little bit better, but still was not all the way better. And I think that week, my doctor always told me, she was like, if you're ever worried, just come in and let's check the heartbeat. We can always do that at any time. So I think like the next day or something, I went in and heard the heartbeat and I was fine. Okay, so that's like in the 13 weeks. And then we get to like 16 weeks, and this was a very profound time for me around 16 weeks. So, really something that I'll never forget. But I remember it was my son's birthday weekend, Maddie's birthday weekend. My parents were in town visiting us, so it was in October. I was in one of those funks. I was battling. I was just, and really, and I think part of what pulled that on is my friend who had lost a baby at 14 weeks got pregnant again while I was pregnant with Benjamin, and she lost her baby again at like 14 weeks.
Yeah, it was kind of like really bizarre that like we were through George and then this, like how many people we were actually hearing and knew, but even like hearing about people losing babies, it was really bizarre. Like this is like not used to be a thing.
Yeah, really. It didn't seem, and we didn't know about it.
It just became more evident. Yeah, like while we were in it.
Yeah,
that I'm like, what's going on? It's like really weird.
So she lost her baby, and then I'm like, and here I am in this super vulnerable spot, and watching her go through round 2. And of course, you can imagine that was super triggering for me, like just, And so anyways, it's a Sunday. Here we are in church, and I am on the struggle bus. And I am really like battling it out with the Lord. And one of the things that he spoke to me and showed me that day was it was like I saw this picture and of like when we get to heaven. And it was like he showed me, he was like, Sissy, like when you stand before me one day in heaven, like there is going to be no one there that lived a pain-free life with no suffering. Everyone who stands before me on that day, they will have some story of how they went through pain and suffering and trial. There will be a story and a testimony in each of them. And I remember saying back to the Lord, but Lord, I don't want this to be my story. Please, I was pleading with him. Please don't, no. It was so bizarre. Why was I even doing that? I don't, call it intuition, call it PTSD, I don't know. Hey guys, I hope that you're enjoying the show, and I wanted to interrupt real quick just to invite you that if you are listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast, I would be so honored if you would go up in the top right-hand corner of your app and click the follow button. Then if you will scroll down and rate and write a review on the show, that would just make my day. I would love to hear from you, hear how the show is impacting you and how you're enjoying it. And with following the show, you're going to get notifications of every time I release a new episode. If you like to watch my show on YouTube, then I am inviting you to subscribe, like, comment, and share. Tell me what you're liking. Share this with your friends if you think that they can benefit from it. So I appreciate you listening in, and my goal is that this show will edify you and encourage you on the way to better health. So if it's doing that, then I'd love to have you along for the ride by subscribing, liking, sharing, following, commenting, reviewing, all the things that would make my day. So call it intuition, I don't know, call it fear, call it PTSD, I don't know what you would call it, but I am literally in this battle with the Lord and going, I don't want that to be my story though. Please, God, don't make me go through that again. Why was I doing that? I don't know. It's so bizarre what your brain and your emotions will do. I don't know why I was doing that, but I was literally begging him. And I remember he brought the verse from Amazing Grace to my mind, the part that says, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. And it was like, he was like, Sissy, everyone that stands before me on that day, that will be part of their story.
That's good.
That they came through many dangers, toils, and snares, and that they saw that I was faithful. And I was just like, oh. Well, about that time, the worship team starts playing the song. Some of you guys might know it. If not, we'll put it in the show notes because it's a good one. But by Maverick City Music, called Promises. And it was like a real popular song at that time, and the song sings like, great is your faithfulness to me, from the rising sun to the setting the sun, you're faithful. And so I'm like hearing this song and I'm like, it's bugging me, because I'm like, this song is saying you're faithful, but what happens if I don't get the outcome that I want? It's so easy to say, like, we lost George, and then God brought us a son, and God's so faithful. Like, how many times do we do that as believers? Like, when the story ends the way that we want it, we're like, God is so faithful. But I'm like, hold on a second. Is he so faithful if I lose my baby again? And I'm like, he has to be faithful. Like, and his faithfulness cannot be wrapped around that the story ended good for me, or it ended the way that I wanted it to. And so I'm just, I'm in this wrestle. I'm like, that's what's going on inside of me. And then the next song, we'll put it in the show notes because this one is good, and this one was a big anchor for me through this journey, was the song Jireh. So it's another one by Maverick City Music. And it starts out, like, I had never heard it before. And it starts out saying, like, I'm going through a storm, but I won't go down. I hear your voice. It carries in the winds. It's calling me out. You would cross an ocean so I wouldn't drown. I've never been more sure than I am right now, or something. So it's like talking about this storm, and I've never heard this song before. And then the chorus goes, Jireh, you are enough. Jireh, you are enough, calling the name of the Lord. I will be content in every circumstance because you are Jireh, you are enough. And so I'm like listening to this and mulling over it, and then the bridge of the song, it says, if he dresses the lilies with beauty and splendor, how much more will he clothe you? How much more will he clothe you? And this is quoting from Matthew 6, the passage about do not worry about your life. And then it says, and if he watches over every sparrow, how much more does he love you? And so I'm singing that, and I'm like listening to it, and just, mulling over the words of this song. Like, God's faithfulness is not about me getting what I want in the end. His faithfulness is that he watches over me, and he never leaves me, and he promises to take care of me. Like, that is what God is faithful to do. And so anyways, we, sing that song, and then we sit down, and our pastor gets up there, and what do you know? He's like, well, we've already sung my song. We've already sung my sermon today. And he's like, today's sermon it's titled, what do you do when you go through the storms of life? And I was like, no, Lord, no. Like, I don't want to go through a storm. No, please. And then here I go again. Please, Lord, don't let this be my storm. I don't want to feel that pain again. No. And so I like cry all through the sermon. Do I sound like an emotional basket case? I promise I was probably holding it together well on the outside. I'm not crazy, but this was all just really hard. So, I'm sitting there just through the sermon. And so when we left church that day, we were going to eat lunch, and I remember telling Matt about this, and I just started do you remember this? I was like, God is not faithful to give me what I want in the end. But I was like preaching to myself. I was like, but what is he faithful to do? Like, he is faithful to take care of me through anything. That is what God says he's faithful to do. Like, he is faithful to take care of me. Just like it says, like, he watches over the sparrows and not one of them falls without him knowing it. And he knows the number of hair on your head, so you don't have to worry. And so it was like, again, this resounding thing got in me of like, okay, I cannot put my hope in Benjamin being born, but I can put my hope in that no matter what comes, God will take care of me. And so I was telling Matt about it and just getting really fired up. And then later that day, we were in the car with my parents, and I'm telling them about it. And my mom says to me this very odd statement. She says, Sissy, she said, it almost sounds like you're expecting him to die. And I was like, it was this very weird thing, but it was like almost in this terrible, awful way. I was kind of like, I am. But I did not want that to happen, but it was like I was. It was so odd. And so, you got anything? You're good? So that was around 16 weeks. Let's speed forward the following week, 17 weeks. Matt calls me up, and we have dear friends back home in Athens, Georgia, and Matt tells me, Ricky and Alex just lost their baby at 37 weeks. And you can know what happened next. I mean, of course, here we go. Trigger central. I'm just triggered beyond just, this is so hard. Like, and what it truly felt like to me was there's literally no time and space when you're pregnant that you're not vulnerable. Like, here is a friend who's about to give birth. She's at the very end, and her baby dies. Like, what in the world? And so I remember at that point, so I was 17 weeks. I remember explaining to Matt, I was like, this is what it feels. This is what I see. This is what it feels like to me. I was like, it feels like my heart is in a glass box, and it's tumbling in the ocean. And the goal is that the glass box arrives on the shore, and my heart is in the box, and the glass box is not broken, and my heart is safe. But I don't know what is in that ocean. There's rocks, there's waves. It could hit anything at any moment and shatter the box, and my heart is going to be ripped to shreds. And it feels so scary. Like, that's how I felt. And that was just like a picture that I saw. And, but trying to get through that week. Well, then I get into my 18th week, and, how the story goes is I was feeling Benjamin move. It was one night actually sitting on this couch in a different house. Me, Matt, and Maddie, it was a Sunday night, was laying there, and he was kicking me so much. It was like he was thumping me. Boom, 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 boom. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I feel him so much. He was kicking me. And it was a Sunday night. I went to bed that night and felt him moving. And that would have been the last time that I felt him move. And so the next day was Monday, went through the day, busy day. Tuesday came. busy day, and I remember sitting again on the couch on Tuesday afternoon, and the next day I was scheduled to go for an anatomy scan at the hospital, and I was going to go to a specialist because I had, lost a baby later, and so they were going to send me to the hospital for the ultrasound. And I remember telling Matt, I was like, I haven't felt the baby move. I don't think I felt him move in a few days. And my doctor was always great. She was like, just come and see me whenever you want. So I was like, I'm just going to run up there real quick and hear the heartbeat. Like, I totally thought I would hear it. I was like, I'm going to run up there real quick, hear the heartbeat. I'll be back in like 20 minutes, And so I got up there. No one was in the office that day except like the people that work there. And she pulls me back. And again, Doppler, doesn't hear anything. But I knew that she would hear something, and then ultrasound, and she kind of starts freaking out. And she's like the only one of the nurses in the office. Like, their ultrasound tech is not even there that day. And so she calls the ultrasound tech and is like, you need to get in here. So the ultrasound tech was like picking her kids up from school, and she was like, I'll be there as soon as I can. Matt was not there. Matt, you came up, right? Yeah, and so it was so crazy because I was sitting there and I was just like, this cannot be happening again. But then there was this other part of me that was like, well, what do you expect? So it was just this very like terribly like numb reaction. It was so weird. Like, my reaction was not like, I didn't fall into a puddle of tears at all. It was just it was kind of like weird. And so Matt came, of course. I didn't want to look at the screen, and I just told the girl, I said, just tell me like yes or no, like heartbeat or no. And she was like, no, there's no heartbeat. And I was just like, oh my gosh, do you have any thoughts or anything you want to share around that moment, how that was for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very similar to the first time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, dang, like again, and like, but still felt like, we were going to continue to press into that. And like, but because of our past experiences too, I knew we're going to be taken care of in this,
mm-hmm.
regardless of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that going into it for
mm-hmm.
sure. But I think what I felt was just like, I need to just be here for my wife,
mm-hmm.
And be as strong as I can, but just be there for her to bounce
mm-hmm.
anything off of and kind of just take,
mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And again, I think the biggest way to describe how I felt was pretty numb. Like, I don't even know if I cried in the office. It was weird. It was just this very weird, almost like I expected it. It was just odd. I hate to even, but I think that was the state of like where I was emotionally through what I'd been through. And through counseling afterwards, like when you've been through that kind of trauma, it like sets something in your brain where you're like, babies die. Like, that's like what, like, babies die. Like, and I would like think to myself, well, like, Matt's here. He was a baby once. I was a baby. Like, everyone that's on this planet was a baby in their mother's womb once, so they all lived. But it was still like, my reality was like, babies die. And, so anyways, I called my mom, like, leaving the office. And I was like, well, we lost our baby. And she was like, what? I was like, yeah, he died. And she was just like, sissy, like, why are you saying it like that? And I was just like, she was just kind of shocked at how like nonchalant or like numb that I was. And so anyway, she got her stuff together. She lives in Georgia, so she, figured out how to get down to us as quickly as she could. And, we had sweet friends. I remember some of our sweet friends, Josh and Heidi Conley, like, had delivered groceries to us that night. And other friends showed up at her house. And, it it was just this odd thing. I mean, here we are literally 10 months later. It has not even been a year, and this is happening again. And so, but in this way, we knew what to expect. We knew what was about to happen. Like, so in some ways it was maybe a little bit easier. But like I said at the beginning of the first episode, when we were talking about George, like if George was a shot that brought me to my knees, like this was a shot that like put me like on the ground face forward. Kind of like there's not a lot left. Like I'm completely devastated. There's not really anything left standing in me at this point. And so yeah, we, again, here we are. It's time to go to bed. I mean, I'm literally like, what? Am I literally going to bed again? Is this literally, I mean, is this, like, I could not believe that this was happening. And here we are, Matt's snoring beside me. I'm awake, and I'm like, how is he able to sleep right now? And I started like spiraling kind of in this like victim like mentality, just this like, I can't believe that, like, poor me. This is so bad. Like, and my husband he's just over here sleeping. He doesn't even care about me. All of those thoughts that like you can just start like, like when you're going through something hard, they just start tempting you. Like, come this way. Think this, go down this path, poor you, be a victim, all of that. And I share this and thank the Lord again. This is one of those moments. So it was like, that was not me. Like, that was not because I am good or I'm strong. Like, that was a gift from the Lord. But I was laying there in our bed trying to fall asleep, and all of these thoughts are swirling around. And the verse, it's from Psalm 34. But it says, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be on my lips. And it was like that verse came up on the inside of me, and it's like something stood up on the inside of me. And when it did, I literally wanted to like get out of my bed and like write it on the walls of our house, like for real. It was just this thing that was like, no, 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 no. I am making a choice right now to bless the Lord at all times, and his praise will continually be on my lips. I will not be a victim. Like, I am not going down that route. And I mean, it was this thing that like stood up in me. And again, I thank the Lord for that, because that is not anything good in me. That is a gift from him, that he gave me the grace and the wherewithal to rise up in that moment and not be beaten down by the enemy's defeat. And so anyways, we had friends that took care of our son while we, had to go off to the hospital again. Josh and Heidi took care of Maddie, which was so sweet. And Matt and I had a good time, but this was a neat thing. So throughout my whole pregnancy with Benjamin, we didn't know what we were going to name him. And I kept telling Matt, I was like, and names are a really big deal to us. And I kept telling Matt, I was like, I feel like we're going to know what his name is going to be like right at the right time. Like maybe like when he's born, we're going to know what his name, because we were like going back and forth and we were just like, we don't know like what his name's supposed to be. And then that day, so the day that we were, it was the day after we found out that we had lost him. We were not willing to name him just like, let's name him John. Like, that was just so like we weren't just going to like name him, but we were also not going to not name him. And so we're just like, okay, like, Lord, what are we supposed to name him? What are we supposed to name him? And Benjamin was a name that we had kind of talked about naming him, but we hadn't landed on it. And then I was reading from Deuteronomy 33. It says about Benjamin, and this was the tribe of Benjamin. he said, "Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long, and the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders." And years ago, I had thought that verse really stood out to me because it was such a picture of rest and security in the Lord. And so I even wondered years ago, like, will we name a child Benjamin? But it just didn't click until after we lost him. And I shared this with Matt, and I was like, I think that his name is Benjamin. And like just seeing this picture of him, like he is resting secure in the arms of the Father for eternity. Like he is resting with the Lord. And so we were like, yeah, his name's Benjamin. And so we decided that day, and that was the day that we were going to go in and give birth to him. And we went into the hospital, and again, it was a little bit easier this time because I knew what to expect. I had been through this, and I really chose this time. I was like, I don't want to be drugged up. That whole situation of how drugged I felt awful after I gave birth to George. I mean, I passed out. I felt really bad because of all of that morphine. And so I decided, I was like, I want to try to get through this with no medication because I really want to be present, like, as soon as he's born. And so, thankfully, I was able to do it that way that time. And, they started giving me medication. It didn't really took for a while for it to start picking up. And my mom, thankfully, she flew in and she got to our hospital room right before things started picking up. And so it was so great that she was going to be able to be with us in that situation, and she had never been there for one of the births of my children, but that one she was able to be there for. And so she came in, and I remember it was pretty soon after she had gotten there that the medication was really picking up for me. And she and Matt were talking, and I just remember being like, okay, y'all, this is picking up. I need y'all to quiet down, and I need y'all to pull that shade down over the window, and it's time for me to focus. And so I, kind of hunkered down, and, just at that point, it started really getting real for me. And I just remember, I closed my eyes and I started crying because I knew what was coming, and I was just like, I don't want to go through this again. And I think I asked my mom and Matt, I was like, can you guys please pray for me? And I don't want to go through this again. And it was the pain was starting to really intensify. And so they came over, and my mom it was such a sweet time with her. It's such a special memory that I'll never forget. But she just stood over me and was just praying. It was so peaceful. And I really felt the peace of the Lord in our room. And so what kind of was going on with me, and this might sound super spiritual, and I am not, I do not mean that at all, but kind of what was happening was I remember feeling I was praying with the Lord, could you let this pass from me? I don't want to have to walk through this. And it was almost reminding me of Jesus. And again, I am making this parallel, but it was it, but also not, because there is no suffering that we can go through in this life that compares to the suffering that Jesus went through for us. But it almost felt like my heart was crying out to the Lord in a similar way of could you let this cup pass from me? I don't want to have to go through with this suffering. And just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane was I don't want to do this. And the Father was you're going to have to. And that's kind of how I felt. But I felt the comfort and the compassion of the Lord of it can't pass. You're going to have to walk through it. And so I'm just laying there, just crying quietly and going through the contractions. And it ramps up, the closer you get. And I remember my water broke. And when my water broke, I just started really, really crying because I knew what was about to happen. Like I was about to have him. And when I started really crying, again, another sweet, sweet memory is I remember my mom literally she laid over on top of me and held me and cried with me. It was like she entered into that moment with me and was one with me. It was like we were going through it together, and he was born, and thankfully, I didn't have any medication that time, so I was very quickly back with it, and but I wanted to have a meaningful time to meet him for the first time. So they took him, and they are doing all of the same things, that you do with another baby. They measure their body, they weigh them, footprint, handprint, all of the things. And I remember seeing Matt went over to the bed where he was, the little place where he was laying. And my mom is a little bit squeamish in general with medical stuff. She's not one that's all into this. So I honestly felt like it might be hard for her to see Benjamin because she's just not whatever. But it was really sweet because I had not yet seen him, but I looked over and she had walked over to where Matt was standing, and she just sat there. She just stood there and just cried and cried and cried. And Matt had his arm around her, and it was just really special that she was willing to go and see her grandson, even though the circumstances were not that great and could maybe be a little troubling for someone. But she entered into that. And so, a few minutes later, time passes, and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, could you please go out and give Matt and I some time together? And so she did, and Matt brought Benjamin over to me, and this time I felt like I was really able to kind of enter into the moment a little bit more, so I wasn't as tormented as I had been with George, and I held him, and I sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. One of those good cries where you just get it out, and I let myself feel the depth of that emotion. And George, to me, was a little, it's interesting with George, there are faces that Maddie makes that I say, that looks like George. There are things about Maddie's face, and I'm like, that is George. And there's things about Wilson that I'm like, that reminds me of Benjamin's face. And George, his face to me had a little bit more furrowed brow and a little bit more struggle in it. For some reason, Benjamin's face was very, very sweet. And it was so peaceful. He really looked so peaceful. And I just remember saying, he's so cute. He's so sweet. Oh my gosh, he's so sweet. And, was just letting it all out. I must have sobbed there holding him for 5 minutes or something. And he was so sweet looking. And then, our doctor, she missed the birth, but she got there finally, and she came in, and we talked about having George, an autopsy done on him and further testing and things like that, just to see if we could figure out what is going on with these babies. Why are we losing these babies? Yeah.
Not George.
Yeah. So this was Benjamin that we decided to do an autopsy. And so since we were going to do that, they had to get his tissue while it was still really fresh. So they kind of were like, okay, well, we're going to have to
take him soon.
Yeah, we're going to have to take him sooner. And we were like, that's okay. And so anyway, so that kind of, we said goodbye, and wrapped that up and went home. And I guess the healing process with Benjamin, one thing that I say about that time is it's as if we felt like, for me personally, I felt like I was kind of suspended on a cloud, and it felt like it could have been a really hard blow, but it was almost like I felt held up and like I was cushioned, like my fall was cushioned. And I attributed that to like the Lord and people praying for us, that it could have been so bad, but I felt really comforted by the Lord. And that song, Jireh, oh man, it became like my anthem. I mean, there were some songs for you that were like one song with Upper Room, Keep My Heart Tender, and that was like one that we were just like, Lord, keep our hearts tender.
That was definitely a song that stood out to me, because it's real easy to kind of go through a time like this and your heart get jaded and really like hard. And when I heard that song, it was like, it really spoke to me, because I was literally like in this way of my heart being tender, was not hardening my heart off to this situation and hardening my heart off to the Lord and things like that. And I was like, my cry was definitely keep my heart tender through any of this kind of stuff that's difficult and trying.
Right. And so anyways, I would say in the days that followed losing Benjamin, there were just some really, really sweet times with the Lord that were so real and so in depth and just so beautiful. And during that time, I was really drawn again to the book of Job, because I'm like, oh my gosh, here I am. Like, again, Job went through a ton, like way more than Matt and I had. But I was like, I want to like learn from him. How did he respond through all of this? And so there was one particular day.
Real quick, if you haven't read Job, haven't in a long time, like you go and read that book, and it's like, you'll literally be like, what in the world?
Yeah.
What in the world?
Yeah. And so, the beginning of Job, it's essentially the story of a man who, lost all of his children, he was a very wealthy man. He lost all of his children were killed like in the same day or something like that. Like, forgive me for whatever, but he loses then all of his livestock, which was like his wealth, and then his body gets attacked with boils. I mean, and it was just like one thing after the other. And so I was reading, this was probably 4 or 5 days after, I think my mom had taken Maddie somewhere, Matt was somewhere, I was reading. And so it is amazing when you are going through pain, things stick out in scripture to you that you've literally never seen before. And so I was reading this, and after it went through him losing all of this, it says in chapter 1, verse 20, it says, at this, Job got up and tore his robe. He shaved his head. Then he fell down on the ground and he worshiped. And that just hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh, is worship my response right now? Do I want to worship God after I've now gone through this twice? And that hit me. And then it said, in all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. And so I'm just like, Lord, let that be me. Let that be me. And so anyways, it keeps going on. And, Job's wife is like, you should just curse God. Like, he hasn't been good to you. And he's like, no, you're a foolish woman. Shall we accept the good from God and not the trouble? Like, here Matt and I are. Matt and Sissy, should you accept God's gifts to you and not the trouble? That's a good question. And then it comes in chapter 4, where Job's friends start coming, and they start saying, all right, this is what's going on. Let us tell you what's happening. You need to do this, do that to get your life back together. And this part blew me up. So I'm reading in the study notes of my Bible, and it was talking about how Job's friends, they knew some things, but they didn't know everything. And that's how we are as humans. Like, we can have humanly wisdom, but we're not God. We don't know what his purposes are. They are hidden from us a lot of times. It says the problem is not so much what the friends knew, but what they did not know. And here's what they didn't know. They didn't know God's high purpose in allowing Satan to buffet Job. And when I read over that, I was like, And I just sat there, and then I was like, let me look up what that word buffet means. I knew what it meant, but I was like, let me look that up on my phone. And so I looked it up in the dictionary, and the word buffet means to be hit with repeated blows. And when I read that, it was like it struck me, and I was like, it like hit me deep in my core. Like, that is what is happening to me. I am being hit with repeated blows. But the beauty of it is, yes, Satan had his way in that, but God had a high purpose for Job's life in that. And it was not Satan just having a heyday doing what he was on a leash. And so when we go through human suffering, it's so easy to be like, did God do this or did Satan do this? Which one? And it's like, I don't know, but God is in control. And Satan he does not have a free leash to do whatever he wants. God's got him on a leash. So whether God allowed my babies to die or Satan killed my baby, I don't know. That's, again, why is an invalid question that makes you an invalid. All I know is that it has happened and that God is going to use it. And so share from Job, like at the end. I mean, one of the things at the end, I studied this book intently and got so much out of it. It was so humbling. But one of the things at the end of the book that it says, and Matt got something different out of it, but one of the things at the end is that it says when Job went through all of this, he lost everything and he questioned God and he had to face God and God humbled him. He said, it says of Job, it says, and the latter part of his life was better than the former. And I really felt like the Lord said that to me, like, Sissy, your life after having gone through this is going to be better than it was before you went through this. And I can say without a shadow of a doubt that it has been. And it has nothing to do with that God gave us another baby in Wilson or that I'm pregnant with. That has literally zero to do with it. What it has to do with is that there was something that was broken in me and that had to die in me and that got resurrected that came out with more of Jesus on the other side. And that is the treasure. Like, that is our treasure as believers going through trials. And I look back on this time and I'm like, that was terrible. That was tormenting, torture. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. But there was something so sweet about it that I am like, I'm so, God, like, I would never trade that being a part of our story. And so what was it that you really got from Job?
Yeah, so, that's so crazy. This book is amazing. But for me, when we went through this last one in Job, I've never noticed this in Job until then. But at the end here, it says, this is Job's response to the Lord. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Like, after everything that happened to Job, all of those unbelievable things, right? He said, man, my ears have heard of you, but now I see you.
Amen.
And like, to say that.
Yeah. That's what happened to us, don't you think?
Yes. To say that after all of that had happened to him was so profound to me. And it hit me like never before, given our situation, that I'm like, man, like I am just dust and ashes, and God is in control, and he is good, and he is faithful, and it's all his. And I'm his.
And like we knew God before, but it was like going through this deep pain. We saw him in a way that we had never seen him before.
And so like, you see the Lord in a much greater light. But,
yes.
But that same concept has just blew my mind after all that he had encountered and experienced. That was terrible. That he had heard of him, but now he's like, I see you, Lord. Which is very profound. So.
Yeah. So, the Lord did. I could go on. I've got notes here of just, I could go on and on about like just the treasures that happened in our lives in that season. And maybe if you're hearing this and you want to know more, we can get together and talk sometime, and I'll love to share with you more. But I will say, after we went through that I knew, like, okay, I need some help. I love the Lord. I felt like I walked through healing after George. Obviously, something was not quite right with me. I need some professional help. And so anyways, I wanted to share this because this was a special part of my healing. I knew that I did, like, as you can probably see, I have a podcast. I like talking. I can process my feelings and emotions. Like, that's not a really big deal for me. But I knew that I needed something more than talk therapy, because I was already doing that with the people that were closest to me, and that wasn't getting my brain right. And so my path was led to a really great psychiatrist in Orlando who did therapy with me called EMDR. And it essentially, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful for it, because it just really helped my brain. But it's a therapy for the brain that helps to move trauma from the emotional side of your brain into the logical side of your brain. And when trauma gets stuck in the emotional side of your brain, that's where the PTSD comes from, because it's like you're constantly reliving it. It's happening in the present tense. And this therapy helps to move it over to the logical side of your brain so that you can view it as this was an event, it happened, but it's not currently happening. And, that is part of the reason why I'm able to sit here and be pregnant and talk about all of this stuff. If you're someone that, you've been through something similar to this, or a trauma in life that has really marked you and is still kind of sitting there, and it can get triggered at different times, and all of the emotion rises, and you're just like, ah! EMDR might be something to look into, with a licensed mental health counselor. A psychiatrist is who I went to see. So anyways, that concludes our story about Benjamin. Obviously, like I always say, like, the Lord changed my life through walking through that. And, we never want pain. Like,
I'll say something real fast.
Yeah.
Just to point out, when she did that counseling or whatever, we later had Wilson.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things, like, how do we know that, like,
I don't know, I'm better.
This is actually working and stuff.
Yeah.
But when she was pregnant with Wilson, which she's here today, she never had any of those thoughts that she had with Benjamin, which was a telltale sign, like, holy cow, like, that really worked.
Yeah. And it did was it helped my brain. Like, I wasn't needing help, like, in the emotional, like, processing. My brain was, like, needed some help, and it really did. And so I want to share the story of Wilson because it's really sweet, but we're going to leave that for another episode. The redemption there, again, Wilson was not the prize through all of this. Like, receiving transformation in our own lives and seeing the Lord in a new light and receiving more of him was the prize. Like, Wilson was just a little gift, and it was a really sweet gift. the story of how he came to be, and I will do another episode on that. But one thing, I'll share this in closing. So we had some friends come over to see us, soon after we got home from the hospital after having Benjamin, and it was a really sweet time and just of talking. And one of our friends, he said, the Lord allows in his wisdom what he could have always prevented in his power. And there were just so many things in that time when you're so vulnerable, you're just like, yes, like that's so true, and his wife shared with me a story. You might have heard of the book Heaven is for Real, or the movie Heaven is for Real, but it's the story of a little boy who was like 3 years old, and he died on the operating table, went to heaven. So he's little, comes back to life, and in the months to come, he's telling his parents things that like he should not know. Like they're like, we've never talked to you about that before. Like, how did you know that? And he's like, I went to heaven. Like I saw Jesus, and I saw my grandfather, and he looks like this. He had never like met his grandfather. And he said, one of the things that he said was, he said, Mom, I met my big sister. And his mom's like, what? Your big sister? Well, she had miscarried before she had him, but she didn't know that it was a girl. And the mom said, what was her name? And the little boy said, she didn't have a name because you didn't name her. And my friend told me that story. I've read that book before, but she was like, Sissy, like you are these boys' mom, and you named them. And guess what? In heaven, like that's their names. Like George and Benjamin are in heaven, and like you named them, and that's what they're going to be when you get there and meet them. And another sweet thing about Benjamin's name that I forgot. So we knew his name was going to be Benjamin. And then he was, after he was born, Matt's mom texted us and said, oh, how sweet. Benjamin was born on she said he was born on my dad's birthday. They share the same birthday. So it was October 29th. And so I just thought, I said, what was his name? What was Matt's grandfather's name? And she said his name was Harold Overton Thomas. And when I heard that name, I was like, Overton is his middle name. And so his name is Benjamin Overton Wetmiller, which is such a beautiful name that really, like I said, like the Lord gave us that name in time, and it's so sweet, like the Benjamin part, and then the part where he shares the same middle name as with Matt's grandfather, because they were born on the same day. And so anyways, those are just some sweet remembrances from our story, and our sincere hope is that this has brought hope and life and truth into your life, whether you can identify with this particular circumstance or if you can identify with some other type of pain. But I will, in closing, I will say this. I had a mentor. I'm going to say two things. I had a mentor. What? Two closes. Okay. I had a mentor when I was in my early 20s, and she said something that stuck with me so profoundly. She said, Sissy, God uses everything and he wastes nothing. So not only does he use everything in the positive, even things that you think could be wasted in the negative, he doesn't waste any of it. Like none of it is wasted. And we saw that and have lived that in this. And then another mentor of both of ours would always say, God can win with any hand. He wins with any hand. Any hand he's dealt, he's like, yep, I can win with that. That's a terrible hand. Like losing 2 babies back to back. I mean, come on. That's a terrible hand to be dealt with. But guess what? When we give it to the Lord, he's like, I can win with that in your life. I can take that hand and I can turn it for your good, and I'll win if you'll let me. If you'll surrender it to me, I'll win with it, and I'll show you beauty from these ashes, and I will bring life out of death, like, which he totally has, like life in our lives out of death from losing 2 babies. So we just, like, man, I know, like, those were terrible times, but, like, sometimes I'm like, it's the terrible times where it's like, God was so real, and he grew us so much more in the hard times than, like, when everything's just la-da-da, wonderful. So anything that you want to share in closing?
I think I hit what came to mind there for that. But
okay, sweet. Well, we'll do another episode. Our next episode, we'll give a little story of Wilson, because he's a part of this story too. He came after a really rough storm, and it's neat, his story, how he came to be. So thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it, that this can bring life and encouragement into their life, and we'll see you next time.